Hey guys, it's Shaylin, and I'm here today with another episode of Recent Reads. This is the series where I just chat about the last 10 books that I read, and it's pretty chill, and I just hang out and talk about books. I'm really behind on filming these videos, to be honest, so you may get several of them in the next little while, because in this video I'm literally talking about books that I read in October of last year. As always, my quick disclaimer, how I feel about a book isn't the law. I don't believe that books are written to cater to me. My thoughts might be different from your thoughts, but if I like a book you hated, or hate a book you liked, that's fine. Alright, so the first book that I read was Ruthless Little Things by Elizabeth V. Aldrich. This is a novella. It's kind of hard to explain, to be honest. What I wrote in my notes, this is just a kaleidoscopic fever dream of intense sexual encounters and drug-fueled partying that slowly descends into a poetic stream of conscious rambling. I'm really sad that I didn't like this. I've been wanting to read more queer lit. Reading sapphic lit just fills my heart with truly endless amounts of joy. This being like an experimental novella, I was like, yes. The main character here is very hedonistic and there's so much pain underneath. You can really feel that. I felt that the characters and plot and stakes and situation and kind of the reason for anything is so abstract that it's hard to actually get like a true impact from that pain that can be felt beneath this character is just like intense hedonism. Because you do feel pain underneath that, but everything else surrounding that in terms of stakes and just like the reason and just anything concrete, it's really muddled. The book kind of descends more into poetry as it goes. I actually would have really enjoyed the poems if I'd read them as like a poetry collection, but as the second half of this novella, it felt a little unearned and disjointed, partly because I didn't have like any grounding point in the first half for which this descent could occur. Anyways, I think if it had been more emotionally earned, it would have worked really well, and I even tabbed some of the poems that I thought were really cool. Just some aspects of the execution left me unable to really extract much from it. So now, let's talk about Slewfoot by Brom. This is my least favorite book that I read in 2022. So I read this around Halloween. It felt like the perfect Halloween read. It's set in a Puritan village and it's about a Puritan witch trial, and then we also follow these like demonic entities. So there's like a demonic monstrous twist to this, and I love anything set in a Puritan witch trial. So it really felt like exactly something I would like. And let me tell you, this book's so bad. First of all, this is just a really cliche story. It unfolds exactly as you expect it will. This is not the first story to ever be written about a Puritan witch trial, and it just brings nothing new to the concept or setting. The characters were so flat, they were so bland. I have nothing to say about any of them. The narrator is also just so dumb. Abatha, she's literally doing spells in a Puritan village where like women will be accused of witchcraft if they sneeze. She's like, oh, it's okay, it's just a little spell to help you with this. I don't care that you got accused of witchcraft. Also, she literally did do witchcraft. So the main reason why this book is so bad is because it's just so racist. Through the beginning, I was getting a bit of an anti-Indigenous vibe. The Indigenous characters were portrayed very stereotypically, almost like childishly, you know, like they were just this like naive spiritual civilization. Then there was this one passage that I got to and I was like, I see what this is getting at. So this book is set in a Puritan village. We also follow these like demonic entities that are called the wild folk, and they kind of live in the woods, and one of them, known as Samson, is like actually Satan, but he doesn't know that he's Satan. So this is a conversation that Forrest, one of the wild folk, is having with Samson, who is Satan. The best of times, Forrest said, sadly, one cannot know the best of times until they are gone, until they are lost. How I would give the rest of my days to have just one of those days back. Forrest sucked in a deep breath. Nothing lasts forever, not even the moon and stars. Now see the first people. See them invade our land. Forrest needed only speak of it and the memories flooded in. The people arriving, coming down from the north during the time of great ice, from a land far away, a type of creature none had witnessed before, animals that covered their skin in the hides of other animals. Samson saw how pitiful they were, these small clusters of nomadic people searching for a home. Saw the wild folk carrying them, the people seeing him, the golden stag for the first time, how terrified they were. Then as time passed, he saw them kneeling before him, just as the shaman had revealed. Saw again the wicker statue of the great stag adorned with flowers and bowls of fruits. The people paying him tribute and blessing him in return, bringing fertility to their crops and wombs. He felt a flush of joy. As their numbers grew, force continued. As the people flourished, they wanted more. They always want more. They're wicked, greedy creatures. Samson witnessed their small villages spring up about the land, watched the people living off the forest, struggling to survive in a harsh, unforgiving world as any creature might. This book has forest spirits apparently be more bitter towards indigenous people than towards literal colonizers on the topic of colonization. The fact that this book paints indigenous people as invaders to demonic creatures, while also having them worship demonic creatures, I guess implying that, like, their beliefs are worship of Satan, which is a Christian concept. So this is not like how the wild folk see all people. They never refer to the Puritans this way. Just a wild take for this book to basically be like, indigenous people are actually colonizers to the indigenous population of demons in North America. Also the fact that they, like, adopt essentially what is satanic worship in this book. It is satanic worship to protect themselves. Whereas the Puritans, really, they violently persecute anyone who affiliates with Satan. It kind of portrays them as wrong and the Puritans as right, because the Puritans couldn't be tricked. Like, they were aware of a genuine threat because in this book, Satan's real. It's all real in this book. So they were actually right, and they tried to fight against it, even though the way they did it was fucked. By making the satanic forces threatening the Puritans real, this book ends up being very, like, pro-Christian and anti-indigenous. The fact that this book describes indigenous people as animals from a non-human perspective, it would be different if the wild folk, you know, they have no concept for what a human is, so they just view all humans that way. But I don't believe there's ever a time that a white character is described that way. And having supernatural force reinforce very harmful stereotypes is not okay, because it has nothing to do with the time period. That cannot be justified by time period, okay, because it's literally a supernatural entity created for this book. And having supernatural forces reinforce very harmful stereotypes implies that these stereotypes are visible to a, like, completely non-biased supernatural entity and therefore have validity to them. When these stereotypes are actually something that were created by colonizers to justify genocide and land theft. Then, on top of that, the fact that indigenous people were literally portrayed as colonizers to the wild folk. To the wild folk, they're as bad as the actual colonizers, who are actually, the wild folk never even are like, oh, those Puritans, how bad that they colonized us. They don't even seem to care. Like, there were actual colonizers in the book, so why not just have the wild folk be mad at them? This book had absolutely no thought put into its framing and how it was framing the different groups within the book. And on top of how offensive it is, it's just not well written. The writing is really mediocre, the characters are so flat, the plot is really predictable. And I read Tides by Sara Freeman. This book follows a woman who has just gone through a great loss in her life, leaves her life to go to a seaside town. It's written in these really short vignettes. This is super, like, dreamy and floaty and hazy, but there's, like, a prickliness to it, I would say. The moments definitely pop, right? Like, the writing is really precise. I think I admired this more than I enjoyed it. The style doesn't really allow you to ever breathe. Like, it's just, 200 pages of one paragraph chapters. So you never get the opportunity to sit with a moment, for tension to build. Everything that happens later in the book feels unearned. There was never really a chance to just sit with something. I was initially really enamored by the style. It also kind of blocked me from getting invested in anything, and so the end felt pretty underwhelming. So then I read Uncertain Kin by Janice Lynn Mather. This is a short story collection, primarily set in the Bahamas. These are really subtle stories. There's like a delicacy of subtlety to them. A lot of them are like these very like regular domestic situations, just like characters at home in their regular day-to-day lives. But then they have this like tinge of weirdness that kind of makes them feel urgent or compelling, even though on the surface they look like very regular situations, but then they just have this compelling, like, strange quality to them that makes it feel new, One recurring theme throughout this book really enjoyed was the way that it examines like cross-generational relationships, parents, children, teachers, students. Like, there's one story in here called Boyo, which I thought was like the best story in the book for sure. Was absolutely incredible. Not all the stories touched me in the same way, but that's kind of the nature of a collection. I really did enjoy a lot of the stories in here. It definitely has some like really special, like, standout stories. So then I read Vintage Sadness by Hanif Abdurraqib. So this is a poetry collection, and it's actually not available in print. You can only get an ebook, and it's free. I'll leave a link to it. Treat yourself on this fine day to some free Hanif Abdurraqib poems. He is one of my favorite poets. The fact that you can just get this beautiful chapbook for $0 is a gift to us all. I love all of Hanif Abdurraqib's work, but I think this would be a great introduction because it's free. And then if you liked it, you can go read his other books because they're all so good. He has this thing where he starts poems with he'll start poems with the mundane, except it's not mundane. It's like kind of these quiet, intimate, specific images from just day-to-day life, but it feels really important. And then slowly the poem evolves in scope, and then 3/4 through the poem, there's a line that just guts you. I don't know. Hanif Abdurraqib has so much power over me, truly. Every time I read one of his books, I feel the entire range of human emotion and then some new emotions that I didn't know existed. The final poem in this book is quite long, and it's written in an exchange between a poet and his editor. That sounds like it would be kind of gimmicky, but it's one of the best poems I've ever read in my life. If you like poetry, why aren't you currently downloading this? So then I read These Impossible Things by Salma El-Wardany. This book follows these 3 young women who've just graduated college. They became friends over their shared Muslim identity, but they all have their own stuff going on, and they've all just graduated college, and, so they're all kind of at major turning points in their life. I just love a book that's like, your girlies are the most important thing in your life, because I agree, and I love when that's the moral of the story here. This book moves super fast. It's really a really quick read. I think this wasn't, unfortunately, not to my preference. I think that this was a little more contemporary than what I usually lean towards, which is maybe more literary fiction. So I think tonally this just wasn't really my preference. I'll admit, I thought that this book was gay. I thought that I was like, okay, you have 3 main characters, one of them has to be gay. The book is very much about relationships, and I'll admit, and I'm probably gonna get flack for this, but I literally don't care about heterosexual relationship dynamics. They just don't interest me. In a book that is entirely about these characters each navigating their own romantic relationship, I just kind of didn't care. That sounds so bad, but sorry. Okay, it's not just because they were all straight. I think it's also because the male characters to me felt really flat, to the point that it minimized dramatic tension. Every man in this book either just sucked completely or was perfect. There was really no in between. So there was just no really tension. It was just yeah, he sucks, or yeah, he's perfect, to the point that I don't buy it. The characters only ever really talk about things directly related to the main theme of the book, which is how faith affects relationships. Occasionally have little side dialogues that almost feel too mundane that you don't really care. But there was no middle ground where they had compelling conversations that were maybe tangential to the themes or still built upon them, but weren't just directly and blatantly about the main theme of the book. The story didn't really feel organic. There was that authorialness to it where it was I'm only ever going to see these characters discussing one thing, and it's the main theme of the book. I felt robbed the characters of a lot of complexity because, I know that they have other things going on in their lives. You must talk about other things. No one only ever talks about one thing. I felt we lost a lot of opportunities to really actually deepen the characters. The main thing I enjoyed about this was the relationship between the 3 main women. That was heartwarming and sweet and a beautiful backbone to the story. The romantic relationships that they had were just uninteresting. Maybe some of that's on me, but I also think it's because the men in this book were really flat in a way that just makes it so the relationships weren't that compelling. So then I read Gods with a Little G by Tupelo Hassman. So this book follows the protagonist Helen and her group of friends. They're teenagers and they live in this town called Rosary, which is run by evangelicals, to the point that they have media is completely cut off, and they are barely able to access the outside world. I wanted to love this a lot more than I did. At the beginning I was really enjoying it. It was floaty. It was a floaty coming of age story. I enjoy those types of books. I really didn't feel the pressure of the setting very much. There should be so much pressure from the setting, but you kind of forget about it. You kind of just completely forget that they're in this weird town where their, freedoms and knowledge and information is so strictly limited. I felt that was the most interesting part of the book, and because that was should have been such a key force of tension, I felt it got quite slow throughout the middle. There were lots of interesting little anecdotes, though, and interesting characters. The main thing that should have given it, heat was kind of often dropped. So then I read A Minor Chorus by Billy Ray Belcourt. So this book follows an unnamed queer Indigenous grad student who's just feeling really burned out and exhausted and disillusioned with academia, and so he decides that he's going to take some time off from school to write a novel, and he returns to his community and to interview people in order to write his novel. And this is a really quite unique novel. It's very essayistic. It almost reads more as an extended braided essay than a novel. So it's very unique reading experience. In voice and structure, it feels more like an essay. Like, the end isn't really the end of a story, and the story isn't really a narrative. It's more of like an exploration, an illumination, a discussion, the character contemplating until he reaches this point of opening up. Not in the way that you get in a novel, but the way that you would get in like an essay. And that's not a bad thing. It's just to say it's quite a unique reading experience. And it's interesting because I've read Billy Ray Belcourt's memoir, and it read more like poetry. He's blending the lines between forms like no one else. There's some really good writing. I tapped quite a few pages. I don't know, he has this ability to just put things into words in a way that feels so straightforward that it's like, why has it never been put into words that way? Okay, let's just do some readings. It was late and I was lonely, and I was in rehearsal for another kind of life. Which means I ran through the boreal forest open-mouthed in search of the edge of the world. I was so small I could be drowned out by the most unimposing gust of wind. Okay, here's a whole paragraph. That we could gallop right off the edge of the world, which in every res in this province, in this country, and no one would notice, is a blessing and a curse. Jack and I were Canadian only on paper, and otherworldly and mythic and heavy with history in every other regard. What were two brown boys dancing in the forests of northern Alberta but glistening accidents? Lowercase letters scribbled down for no one to see that somehow against all odds came to life. What was I if not a disobedient blur? That's like maybe the best paragraph I've ever read in my life. I don't know, just throughout, he's putting things into words in a way that it feels like they were meant to be put into words. Like, it's just one of those books that is simple, but, like, impeccable, you know? Then I read Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. We follow this photographer who, you know, finds men just, like, out and about at, like, the grocery store or whatever, and then takes very, like, you know, quite, like, explicit photographs of them. We kind of just follow, you know, this relationship that she has with one of her models and her best friend who's obsessed with her, and it spirals. It really does spiral. This is a bit of a staple of the unhinged woman canon. We begin on this character who feels so, like, intimidatingly in control of her life and in control of other people. As it slowly starts to crumble and fall apart, so does her entire psyche. But she is one of those kinds of characters that you can't look away. Like, she's charismatic. It almost feels manipulative, but like in an interesting way. It feels like she's manipulating you as the reader to make you keep watching her, even though she's not someone that you want to be around. So finally, I read The Book of Goose by Yiyun. This book follows these two French farm girls, and one of them, Fabienne, is very brilliant and intelligent, and she has quite a dark mind, and she says to the protagonist, Agnes, when they're quite young, they're like 14, we should write a book. I'll tell the story, but we'll put your name on it. So it will be made of both of us. The book ends up getting published and getting a lot of attention towards it, and so it kind of catapults Agnes, who did not write it, into a bit of, you know, marginal fame, shall we say. But it's not her. She didn't write it. And, you know, it's about the relationship between these two girls and Agnes trying to take on the burden of Fabienne's thoughts in a way. Very, like, luminous and sensitive to the nuances of girlhood and young female friendships. If you love a girlhood book, like I do, this is really quite nuanced and aware of the subtleties of girlhood and the friendships that you have at that age. It's a very quiet storyline, but it's very interesting even at the moments that it's slow and nothing is happening because of that, like, luminosity that it has. You know, like, the detail, the sensitivity, the sense of truth makes it really compelling. Subtle book, very subtle book. You know, there were points where I do maybe wish that it was doing a little more, just because it is fairly long and quite simple in many ways, but at the same time, like, there's, I don't know, delicacy doesn't really feel like the word, because the style isn't necessarily, like, delicate like I would think of in books. When I think of books that are very delicate, that's not really what I think of. But there's, like, a delicacy to the character. This main character, Agnes, who in many ways isn't the protagonist of her own story, and she's trying to figure out what it means to be, you know, centered in this narrative that she doesn't believe she should be centered in. And anyways, very interesting book, very unique book. So that's all for this episode of Reason Reads. Thank you guys so much for watching. This will be the first Reason Reads that I post in 2023. But I would also love to hear what your favorite books that you read in 2022 were. I have 3. I can't pick between them. They're all equally perfect. When I'm Gone, Look for Me the East by Quan Barry. Amazing. If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga. Amazing. and All This Could Be Different by Sara Matthews, which I haven't talked about yet. It'll be in the next episode of Recent Reads because I read it right near the end of the year. So that's all for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know what your favorite book you read last year was and what books you're looking forward to in 2023. And I'll see you in another video. Bye!